there. But that told me that she was attacked from behind, because whoever strangled her, she's putting so much pressure to hold herself down that she actually broke off the part of the arm to the chair. Okay, so where did she go from there? How did she end up going down there? The police said, oh, he's taken her over his shoulder and taken her down the lift. Codswallop. Can't be done. Big girl. Couldn't be done. All right. So I thought, no, not down the lift. Couldn't carry her that far. No way. So then I went down the stairs and I started fingerprinting the stair handle. And I found her hand mark every 12 inches. That tells me that she's actually running down the stairs. Okay? About the 4th floor up, there's a small speck of blood about 10 feet away from the stairs. And it's pointing at an angle. That there, whereas the guy who must have been chasing after her, because he didn't kill her there, she's actually running down the stairs. And he's hit her across the head with some implement or whatever. One speck of blood. So I keep going down the stairs, and the handprint is getting less and less. You're reading the scene, okay? Using her palm mark or whatever, you can actually see it. There's somebody definitely behind her, because his is behind hers, but he's also taller because of the distance between his palm and his next palm, which was about nearly 2 feet. So I get down to the bottom there. I said, right, she was actually killed in the car park, not upstairs. He didn't carry her down. I said, right, you're looking for somebody or something with a red and white blue rope or something like that. And then a security guard came round the corner. And what did he have on? A lanyard. Red, white and blue. So I said to the police, find out who was on duty. They found out, they went to his locker, forced it open, and there was his clothing covered in blood. They got their man. Reading the scene. Okay? I'm now going to say, okay, that's fingerprint standards or whatever. I'm going to jump now to crime scene standards. Allan Jamieson is right. I don't know if some of you saw the Panorama programme on the McNamara case. The McNamara case is getting a little bit famous now, and Michael knows all about it, and his team are working on another case at the moment. It's same scene examiner. This particular gentleman is a businessman. He's a millionaire, actually. And his finger mark was apparently found on a jewellery box at a burglary. He lives in Bolton, and apparently this place had been burgled was some miles away he'd never been to in his life. So you can imagine when the police were knocking on his door and were saying, we're going to be arresting you for a burglary. Of course, he was shocked, you know. He did have previous, because he's 40-odd years old, he did have previous when he was about 18 for a bit of drugs. But never committed any crime since then. Obviously, he made a name for himself doing his business, and he's a millionaire. So he called myself in privately, and he also called in Pat Wertheim, who's an American expert who I've worked with on the McKee case. And we looked at this mark and that, and we said, well, this hasn't come from a jewellery box. Now think about what I told you about the first scenario, about the person buying an item. And I looked at the lift, and so did Pat, and we said, well, this hasn't come off a jewellery box. It's come off a rounded object, like a vase or something like that. And this scene examiner, his notes were atrocious. He didn't know where he lifted the finger mark from, although he guessed it was a jewellery box. He couldn't remember which room it was in. I'm surprised he could find out which house it was from. And so it was awful, terrible. Anyway, it went to court. Allan McNamara went to prison for a year. So what I'm actually saying to you, when you come to crime scene examination, look at it, look at the details very carefully. Look at the scene examiner's notes, because they don't always tell the truth. They'll put, yes, I found a mark there, I found a bit of blood here. Whereabouts? The position of evidence is very important. Very important. Now then, the same scene examiner has gone to a murder. The guy's in prison at the moment. I can't remember his surname. His name's Graham. And I've had to call him Campbell Malone. Who's a fine solicitor. He's great. And just another point, by the way, going off at a tangent there. There are very few solicitors in this country that can actually work on miscarriages of justice. I can put them on the one hand, because all the rest, they haven't a clue. They just don't realise about scientific evidence, evidence from crime scenes, fingerprint evidence. They just don't know, and they do not call in the experts. And that is a big problem. If you're going to fight a miscarriage of justice, you have to do the donkey work. You have to keep your eye on the ball. You have got to fight the case. Don't rely on one or two people. You can't do that. Don't go to court and think, yeah, I've got a great team here. You won't know until you actually look at the evidence yourself. Go to the solicitor and say, why haven't you looked at this? Why haven't you done that? Why are you calling these experts when they don't know what they're doing? Because it's you that's got to look at that evidence. And it's very important. I mean, I get called in a few times, especially with innocence projects. I've worked with innocence projects in America and Australia, and it always comes down to the same thing. It's the family that do the work. In America, it's hard luck there, because some 5 of the cases I've done out there, they've all been executed. Too late. All right. Call us in before. I've got a case now in America where I'm looking at, and the fingerprint evidence is bogus on 8 points. Well, that's useless. So I've called Pat Wertheim in, and we're going to work together on this particular case to stop this guy from going to the electric chair. Miscarriages of justice does not just go with live people. It also can depend on dead people. Why do I say that? Because I've got 2 cases at the moment where both kids have been killed overseas. They've come back as either a traffic accident or a drugs overdose. They've actually been murdered. We've got a big problem in this country with coroners. So you can see with miscarriages of justice, yes, okay, we've got criminals, but God, we've also got problems with coroners as well. Have you heard of the McKee case? I think some of you can we have the McKee case. It was also on Panorama. The McKee case. How are we doing for time? 5 minutes. Right. The McKee case has been going on now for nearly 10 years. I came in 7 years ago, and the reason why I came in is because I gave evidence against the Scottish Criminal Record Office, and New Scotland Yard did not like it. And I decided, because they made my life a misery, just like yourself over here, and I was an instructor at the Police Hendon College. I actually taught forensics and fingerprints. And I decided, oh, sod the lot of them, I'm going to leave and start my own company fighting miscarriages of justice and doing defence work. The McKee case last year, she won £750,000 from the Scottish Executive, because the 4 experts who gave evidence against her were actually lying. Another point is, with miscarriages of justice, it's difficult for us as well, because in the end, you are fighting a system, you are fighting a police force, you are fighting the establishment. It is not easy, and it takes years. It's taken me 7 years to fight on the McKee case. Yes, we've got a result with her, but don't forget that we've got a guy who went to prison for 3 years, and we had to get him out, because that was a forgery as well. Shouldn't have been there. His case is going to come up. It's even worse than the McKee case. So, that's just one point. It does take a long time and can take years, but you can finally get there. I'm just going to tell you about the Sudovich case. The Sudovich case was a young lad who went over to Serbia. His mother was Serbian. She came over here. She's a top human rights lawyer in this country. Her son came back as a drugs overdose. She wasn't happy with it. She phoned me up and said, look, can you fingerprint various items? I fingerprinted them. Nothing on them. I said, have you got any photographs? She showed me the photographs. I said, look, your son's been murdered. Why are you accepting? She said, I don't. She said, but no one's ever told me that before. I said, look at his face. He's got a broken nose. Look at his hands. He's got defence wounds. He's got blood on his hands as well. She had been through an inquest. The local police, they didn't want to know. She actually went through the post-mortem in Serbia. There was never ever one done. The police over here, they do not check if there's been a police action over there, or if the coroner's done his job over there. Nothing been done on this case. I went to Serbia a few months ago. There's blood everywhere. That young lad was actually murdered by the state police. He was murdered by the state police because his mother, who didn't tell me, and I had to get it out of her in the end, is she helped Serbians to escape from Milosevic, done their human rights. Now we know the reason why he was murdered. Okay? Big problems with the coroner over here, because he doesn't know what he's doing. Absolute rubbish. He had the photographs, he had all the evidence, he did nothing about it. And now trying to get his body out of the grave and examine him again, well, it's too bloody late. He's buried ages ago. So that's miscarriages of justice, just with dead people. It's also the same with live people. All right. Another quick case, Duggan case. These are two very high-profile cases at the moment. Quick with this, I've only got 2 minutes apparently. Erica Duggan, her son was studying at Sorbonne in Paris. He wanted to demonstrate against Blair with Iraqi war. He went with his student friends over the border into Germany. He found himself in the middle of a neo-Nazi organisation. It was them that was actually doing the rally. So you can imagine a young Jewish lad, right-wing. Next day he was actually found a traffic accident on a German motorway. Mother phones me up, look at the photographs again. No way, he's been murdered. This accident has been stage managed. Simple reasons, going on to forensics. There's no glass, no hair, or no blood or whatever on his face or anything like that. There's no tire marks or anything like that. There is no blood, hair on the 2 cars. One car supposed to run over him. No way. There was sand on the bottom of his shoes. There was sand on both cars. That young lad was murdered at a building site somewhere. Okay. It'd been raining. If he'd been running along the motorway, that sand would have come off his shoes within a matter of seconds. Big problem. Looking at the first car, smashed glass. It's been hit 2 or 3 times with a sledgehammer. I suspect he was also hit across the head with a sledgehammer. No post-mortem done in Germany. Same coroner. He's come back here. Accidental death or whatever. Big problems. Okay. All right, I think my time is up. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you very much for listening.
I think enjoy it is the wrong word, Allan. It's very chilling to hear what you had to say, but thank you very much for saying it so clearly and for opening our eyes to some of the things that go on. So thank you very much indeed. I'd now like to ask Paul Dietrich to speak, and he's going to speak on the issue of Jeffrey Hyde, wrongly convicted for importation. And he's got a script he's going to read from there, and then he'll answer questions afterwards when we come to that session.
Okay. I joined London Against Injustice because of what happened to my father-in-law, Jeffrey Hyde. In November last year, he was convicted of conspiracy to supply 77 kilos of cocaine. He was sentenced to 22 years in prison. He's 60 years old. His defence team tell him there was no bad law in the trial, so therefore they say there are no grounds of appealing the conviction. He's now fighting a confiscation order made under the Proceeds of Crime Act. The Crown Prosecution Service are seeking to seize everything he owns, including the house he lived in with his second wife and son, the house of his first wife, who has circumstantial schizophrenia, and a small property in Spain. This, despite the fact that the Crown's own accountant, who investigated his finances for the purpose of this order, said there was no evidence of dirty money anywhere. In total, they are seeking around £1 million. Prior to being found guilty in November, my father-in-law had no previous convictions of any kind. He was a haulier and one of 4 tenants who rented space in a transport yard in Chertsey, near the M25 in Surrey. In February last year, a Spanish lorry pulled into that yard. There's nothing unusual in that. You're not allowed to lock the gates of the yard because of a clause in the tenancy agreement, so lorries from across Europe often pull in to park overnight. The Spanish lorry was loaded with almost £10 million of cocaine. Within an hour, the drugs had been unloaded into a white Astra van. The police knew the lorry was coming. They had been staking the place out for at least a fortnight and had set up a surveillance camera nearby. The police had been tipped off, but because of a legal mechanism, the PII order that Kevin was speaking about earlier, because of this PII order, they don't have to tell us, or they say they don't have to tell us, exactly what they were told. When the drugs were unloaded into the van, the police swooped and arrested the drivers of the lorry and the white Astra van. Now, at that time, Geoff was at home, unaware of what was going on. He'd been at the yard earlier that evening to make sure everything was okay at the end of the working day. As usual, he had shifted a couple of vehicles a few feet to allow space for one of his own drivers who was due back that night. He hadn't stayed at the yard long because he was nursing a cold. He left just as the Spanish lorry carrying the drugs arrived with the van. The first Geoff knew about the police being there was when his driver, who had turned up just minutes after the Spanish lorry, called to tell him there were police in the yard and that they wanted to get into the office. So Geoff drove back to the yard to let them in. He had with him his mobile phone. When he got there, the police asked him who he was. He told them and let them into the office. Around half an hour later, they arrested him on the basis that he was the owner of the yard, even though he was just one of 4 tenants. He was taken to Charing Cross police station and kept in a cell overnight. He had taken some Benylin to fight the effects of his cold. In the morning, he was interviewed. The interview lasted just 27 minutes, but in that time, Geoff made 2 mistakes. Firstly, he declined an offer of a solicitor to be present. He didn't need one, he hadn't done anything wrong. Secondly, he didn't tell the police he had received a series of calls on his mobile phone that evening, asking if a lorry suffering brake problems could come into the yard so a mechanic could work on it. The police knew Geoff was aware of a foreign lorry being in the yard because Geoff had told his driver it was there, having repair work done to its brakes. When the police asked Geoff how he knew about the lorry being there, he told them that as he left the yard, he had spoken to the driver of the white Astra van, who he assumed was a mechanic come to fix the brakes. But the police knew this wasn't the case because they had it on camera. So why didn't Geoff just tell them about the calls? Because, sitting in the police cell overnight, panicked and confused, he thought that if he did, they would think he was in on it. On the basis of this panicked answer, he was charged. We don't know who it was that called Geoff with the story about broken brakes. We do know the brakes weren't broken, but the warning light on the dashboard had been fixed to look as if they were. All we know about the man who called is that he said he used to work for a company that once operated from the same yard as Geoff. And for Geoff, that was enough to offer him space. That was enough for him to offer him space to fix his brakes. Hauliers tend to help each other out if they can. The police say they don't know who he is either, so he was not brought to court. He was referred to during the trial as the green phone. On the same night, another caller was in contact with the driver of the white Astra van. He wasn't brought to court either, and he was referred to as the orange phone. Of all the 4 phones involved, Geoff's was the only one that wasn't using an unregistered pay-as-you-go SIM card. Given that, it's incredible to believe that were he guilty, he would have driven to the yard with that very phone in his pocket, the only thing to link him to the conspiracy. In fact, it's incredible to believe that knowing the police were there, he would have driven to the yard at all. And would someone involved in a multi-million-pound drug deal really decline the offer of a solicitor during his police interview? There were 8 calls between Geoff and Green Phone that night. The longest was 1.5 minutes. These calls weren't recorded, or if they were, no one outside of the police or the Crown Prosecution Service has heard these recordings. At trial, the Crown Prosecution Service used these phone calls to argue that Geoff was the prime mover in the conspiracy. They created a script to fit the calls. So instead of, "I've got a lorry with broken brakes," we got, "The lorry with the cocaine is on its way." Instead of, "I'm going to the yard later, if there's space, your lorry and mechanic can come in," we got, "The drugs are coming, I'll go to the yard to make sure the coast is clear." And instead of, "Are you there yet? Can my broken lorry come in?" we got, "The lorry with the cocaine is just round the corner, get ready." And so on. Complete fiction. But that was the only so-called evidence that was presented to the jury during the trial of Geoff and the driver of the Spanish lorry. That and the fact he had moved some vehicles around. There were no calls with Green Phone before that evening, no evidence of financial irregularities in Geoff's accounts, no odd travel arrangements, no DNA, no evidence of Geoff meeting anyone said to be involved. Nothing. Before November last year, I had no reason to think that organisations such as London Against Injustice were necessary, that people were meeting up in halls and rooms across the country to share their knowledge, experience and support to others forced to live with a miscarriage of justice. Like most people, I thought there was no smoke without fire, and that courts didn't lock up innocent people. Now I know different. Our defence team say there is nothing they can do. We felt we had nowhere to turn. So when we found out about this group, London Against Injustice, it gave us a little hope. It helps to know there are other people in similar positions, people who have experience of miscarriages of justice. Since we joined, and we've only been to 2 meetings, we've been given lists of solicitors and told where to look for information about what might happen next. When you get involved in a miscarriage of justice, a lot of things suddenly don't make any sense. London Against Injustice has helped us to try to make some sense of it all.
Thank you, Paul, for that very moving story, which is really what we're all about here, trying to help things like that. Thank you very much. This is Michael Naughton, well known to everybody, I think, from Bristol University, who's been pioneering these cases for a very long time, works academically, the Innocence Project, the Progressing Prisoners Maintaining Innocence campaigning organisation, and other things, and has written extensively on the whole problem of those maintaining innocence. Michael, the floor is yours, 15 minutes.
I don't think I'm going to take 15 minutes, actually.
Well,
which is going to surprise you, Bruce.
It is going to amaze me, but there we are.
And anybody else who knows me. Mark Macdonald spoke earlier about the Innocence Project that he's working with Inns of Court School of Law. All I wanted to say was something brief about the Innocence Network UK. We set up the Innocence Network UK 3 years ago, and the first Innocence Project, member project, was at Bristol University. I brought 2 students today from the University of Bristol Innocence Project to say a little bit more about the promise of Innocence Projects from an educational perspective and in terms of what Innocence Projects are able to do that the existing legal system can't do in miscarriage of justice cases. But also, Joe Oppenheimer is going to talk about the practical limitations that Innocence Projects are actually coming up against in terms of our problems with trying to find information and data and files from the Crown Prosecution Service and the police. And he'll say some of the things that we're trying to do to get around some of that. So the Innocence Network UK is, like UAI, is an umbrella organisation for member innocence projects in universities, principally in England and Wales, but we're getting some on track in Scotland. So like UAI, federating the campaign groups and victim support groups, the Innocence Network is federating innocence projects. Up until last year, we started off 3 years ago, we were the first Innocence Project, first member. Last year there were 7 Innocence Projects operating, working on cases. And we've been inundated this summer. It seems year on year the word is spreading. And there is probably going to be 12 or 15 member innocence projects by Christmas. The reason why I think it's important that we work together in a network is so that we can ensure that there are working protocols which are complied with. I was saying to Mark earlier that it's all well and good having students who are interested in working on some of these cases to supplement their education, and as I said, Gabby Tam will say more about the educational benefits, but students come and go, and what happens with those cases? And the other thing about the Innocence Projects working with the Innocence Network is that, as I was saying to Mark Macdonald outside, is that they are entirely prisoner maintaining innocence or alleged victim of a wrongful have to be a prisoner. There are projects working on people who are no longer in prison or who were not given a custodial sentence at all. They're entirely prisoner maintaining innocence focused, or they should be. There have been some shortcomings with some of the cases that the students are working on, and this is why the protocols have become important. And what's been rolled out this year is something that's being called a client care letter, which is principally a contract between the students working on the case, because I think they're privileged to be working on these cases, and the prisoner or the alleged victim. And there's going to be contact details, so if the prisoners are being given short thrift by the students, not being communicated properly by the students, there's a staff contact that the prisoner or the alleged victim of a wrongful conviction can talk to. We've got a website, innocencenetwork.org.uk, and we've left some leaflets here which gives brief information about what we do. We're having a training event between the 2nd and 4th of November. UAI are being represented there, going to come and communicate to 250 plus students who are going to be working on these 12 or 15 innocence projects over the next year. These are the new members to the projects, not the existing members. So it looks like very shortly we could have over 500 students working on innocence projects around the country. And when you think that we started off with 5 students at Bristol 3 years ago, I think it's pretty phenomenal where we are already. And, you know, these students then leave the university and they're replaced with hundreds more students. And I think that, you know, we need to wait to see what the real impact of this is. And as I said, Gabby and Joe will discuss more critically some of the things that we're doing, so you get sight of the possible impacts that we're going to have. So I want to pass it over, and I think it was about 4 minutes.
Michael, this is absolutely wonderful. You get a medal. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Can I have the students? Are you 2 or 3? 2 students. Okay. Well, we're going to be led off by Gayla and Tan, or is it Gabby? Gabby, is it? Is going to speak to us. You at the University of Bristol yourself, Gabby?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, fine. Well, Gabby's going to tell us her side of this Innocence project. Gabby, the floor is yours.
All right. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we've started and our current developments, the promises of Innocence projects, and also the impact that we are currently having on the university and legal education in general. We basically started with just 5 students, Joe, me, Ahi Abena over there, and one other. And we started basically with nothing, but a pile of letters from prisoners to Dr. Naughton claiming that they are innocent. So because we started with nothing, we've got to devise some form of structure. And we decided that we are going to have some criteria to have a focus on the kind of cases that we would be working on. And the criteria that we came up with, that's prisoners who still have long-term imprisonment remaining, so that it allows us enough time to work on the case, prisoners with no legal representation or assistance, and very importantly also prisoners who are maintaining factual innocence. Because what we found out from reading the letters is that some of them aren't actually claiming to be factually innocent, but they're more arguing along the lines of legal technicalities. And what distinguishes us is that we are not a miscarriage of justice project. I think Michael was mentioning it just now, but we are an innocence project. So factual innocence, it's our main concern, and it's the kind of cases that we work on solely. And currently, in about less than 3 years, we are currently working with about a group of 20 students. We're working in 3 firms, and we're investigating a total of 6 cases, and we're thinking of taking a couple more once we've reviewed our caseload at the end of this term, actually. And also, we are looking to recruit about 10-15 more students to join us, so that we can have more resources to work on our cases. And I think, more critically, I think the promise of Innocence projects really stems from the kind of unique position that we are in as law students. I think because we are not part of the system, we are not lawyers, we are not the CCRC, so we are not subordinate to the procedural limits, to the rules that forms the system. So we will still keep on working on cases, even though a lawyer may think that there's no grounds of appeal, that there's no fresh evidence, there's no fresh arguments, or there are just no evidence which they would deem as exceptional circumstances. And the thing about Innocence projects and us, really, is that we will still keep on working on cases like that, because we understand that there are limits of the system, and the system cannot guarantee that innocent people will overturn their wrongful convictions. And we found out that there are a lot of causes of miscarriages of justice, first confessions, prison grass evidence, and even though some of the cases, you may see elements of this inside, but these cases cannot be referred, maybe because they have already been used in trial, or for whatever reason, CCRC can't refer it. So we will still carry on working on cases like that, and if the CCRC don't refer it, we'll go public with it, we'll make more documentaries like the one we did with Simon. And yeah, and we'll do our bit, hopefully, to communicate such cases to the CCRC and to pressure them into reforming the system and referring these cases in the future. And I think the work that we are doing is having a very significant impact on the university and also legal education in general. Miscarriages of justice and wrongful convictions, it's increasingly popular among students. Students want to get involved with Innocence projects. Like when we have our first recruitment 2 years ago, we were only looking at taking in 10 to 15 people, and we had 100 over students showing up for our recruitment drive. And also this year we have an option for students to do their dissertation on miscarriage of justice, and that has apparently been the most popular choice so far. And I think it's also changing the way in which law students and lawyers are engaging with the law and the way we look at the law. Traditionally, I think it's always been just about procedures, due process, rules, but I think we're bringing the people back into legal education right now, because Innocence Project is showing us that the system is not just about all these things. It's also about people, lives, families, and prisoners, and all of them can be very damaged whenever a wrongful conviction occurs.
What I'm going to talk about is what it can do in terms of casework in the context of our limitations. Because obviously fostering hope without some consideration of the problems we come up against in terms of investigating cases can inevitably lead to disappointment. And there's going to be a tiny bit of law in what I say, and there are a couple of sort of slightly technical things, so I'll try and keep them concise and clear, but apologies in advance if I'm at all confusing. Right. Obviously, we try and send cases, refer cases to the CCRC. The single most debilitating limitation we have is getting hold of documents from the CPS and the police. And in contrast to the Criminal Case Review Commission, which under Section 17 of the Criminal Appeal Act 1995 can get hold of pretty much everything document-wise to do with the case. We can't get hold of things like police policy books, which are essentially a log of all the decisions and actions taken by police in the case. We can't have access to the Holmes 2 computer, which is a large database which will contain most of the information on a person maintaining factual innocence. And due to PII, public interest immunity, we can't get hold of information regarding the sources of evidence. So what can we do?